and when the list was examined, those names were not even ticked, meaning that those serial numbers did not vote. But when that exercise is completed, 20 to 30 minutes are wasted. And these are the things that continue to consume valuable time. You saw today an incident where someone coughed or something in the room, and that became a big fiasco. Doctors had to be called in. The process was stopped. Persons in the room were detained and had to have been screened, etc. So these sideshows, as I have been describing them, continue to consume valuable time which can be spent on counting of the ballots. Today, GCOM had a meeting, and many of the burning issues which we have been highlighting to you were addressed at this meeting. I am sure that some representative of GCOM will brief you adequately on the issues raised in the meeting, but importantly, the consideration was given to the pace of the exercise, and I understand that GCOM would be moving in the direction of establishing additional stations and looking at the hours of work with a view of bringing greater alacrity to the process. So we welcome that. That is going to save time, and that is going to accelerate the work. We understand also that GCOM will be considering, or has considered, and they are discussing it as I speak, they are going to also consider limiting the checklist. As you know, there is a checklist of 19 items that have to be examined before the counting begins. We said from the inception that that is not required to be done for the counting of ballots. That will only detract from the counting. The counting is the main theme of the event. Finally, good sense is prevailing, and they are going to review those 19 items that have to be checked and reduce that number significantly. We were also told that the objections are going to be reviewed with a view of minimizing them, and also all of the observations which are being made will be recorded in the observation report. You heard this morning an issue arose that only some objections are being recorded and others are not getting an opportunity to have their objections recorded in that report. I denounced that this morning, saying that it is unfair and it's a question of natural justice, because if you hear from one party, then you should, and you record what one party says, every stakeholder in that room has equal rights, and if you hear from one and you record what that one says, then it obliges you to record all the objections from every other person. Or you don't record anyone. Whatever the rule is, it must be equitably and equally applied across the board. So that decision was again reiterated, and fortunately I am told that that list of decisions which we have been advocating for from day one will finally be prepared and will be distributed to the parties, listing the decisions which have been made in relation to the various issues that have arisen over the past week. So I believe the process, GCOM itself, is seeing sense in the criticisms and the commentaries which we have been making, because I am sure that they themselves would like to conclude the exercise with greater speed and greater dispatch than it is actually proceeding with. And therefore, I believe that good sense is prevailing, and they are actually taking measures in an active way now to implement some of the recommendations and suggestions which we have respectfully made over the past week. Another issue that I want to highlight is that the Carter Center and the other observer teams who have expressed an intention to return should be facilitated. The election is still ongoing. These people, these organizations were accredited to observe the elections to the very end. An election lawfully ends with the declaration of the final results. These final results for this election have not yet been declared, and therefore the election is still ongoing. Those persons and those teams that have been accredited have a legal right to be here under the Observer Act, Observer of Elections Act. They were accredited under that act, and their accreditations were not revoked. They were appointed by the President, or given permission by the President, and accredited by GCOM. If there is a revocation of those facilities, then it must be done in writing, and it must be published in the official gazette. That is the legal position. Because their accreditation and their appointment and invitation were all published in the official gazette. So for all intent and purposes, those accreditations are still extant, and those people are still qualified and have a duty in law to be here to observe the elections process. I understand that efforts are being made by those observer teams that are overseas to return, and I hope that the government will not construct obstacles, as they have done previously, to prevent these observers from returning. The process still has some time. CARICOM team is here. We don't know how long that team will be here for, because although there is an effort to expedite the process, it is clear that the 25 days deadline will elapse, so we don't know whether CARICOM team will stay beyond that time. Of course, we will do everything to persuade them to remain, but the other observer teams must be here, because at the end of the day, we want a process that must be certified as a credible process, because we know of forces that are present and prevailing who would like to derail the process, and we would not want that to happen. So those are the brief remarks that I would like to make at this point in time, and of course I invite your questions.
Could you walk me through why the party would sign the SORs with the observation report, since you're not too keen on having the observations be part of this process?
Once our observations are recorded, we are signing the report.
You're making observations too.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. This morning, the Deputy CEO held a briefing with the staff and said to them, which was a unilateral departure from the Commission decision, that when a person makes an objection, that objection must be recorded. But if another person says anything in relation to that objection, then that other thing must not be recorded. Now that is patently unfair. The Commission decision was, put in everything in the report, record what everyone wants to see, and they will sign on at the end of it. So anytime we are prevented from making our observations or having our observations recorded, we have refused to sign the observation report. We sign the observation report once we are allowed to record our observations on that report.
What are some of the observations your party has been making in this process?
We have been repeatedly pointing out that these persons who are standing and identifying serial numbers, I object to this serial number on the ground that this person is dead. They are not producing any evidence to show that that person was dead on election day. They are saying that these persons who are migrated were not in Guyana on election day. We are saying, what is your evidence to say that? Because these persons, there is a ballot there that person is supposed to have cast. That person would have identified himself with an ID card. That person would have been permitted, the presiding officer would have looked at a folio which has a pictorial representation of that person matching the biographic data on that person's identification card or whatever form of ID that person would have used to vote. Then when that person would have been given a ballot, the marked list, the line would have been drawn through the list of electors for that station, crossing off that person's name. And then at the end of the process, that person would have cast a ballot, and at the end of the day, that ballot would have been counted. And that all the ballots for that station would have been totaled. And a polling agent representing all the political parties, a presiding officer, and an assistant presiding officer would have been present in that room and observed that entire process. And the summary of that process, the cumulative summary of that process, is then reduced into a document called a statement of poll. And every person that participated in that polling place for that day as workers are required to sign that statement of poll, endorsing that the information contained in that statement of poll are accurate, legitimate, and credible. So after all of that is concluded, for you to come now 2 months after to make an allegation that a person did not vote who has a particular serial number without producing a shred of evidence, in my view, is an act of ludicrosity. So we have instructed our persons in the recount process to record objections like that or observations of that type. For example, you all know that there were persons on the list who were in fact not in Guyana, or because we had a ruling from the Chief Justice that you cannot take migrated person's name off the list, that residency is not a requirement or a qualification for voting. We also know that it is a reality that the Registrar of Deaths Department and the GCOM did not extract every possible dead person name from the list. So you have a list of electors that would have persons who have migrated and have persons who died. But those persons cannot vote. So when they are objecting to a list of electors, there are instances where they may be correct that the list will have persons who have died or have migrated. But you will, when you check the list of electors now, you will see that there is no mark to it. And there is no corresponding ballot in the box. Meaning that the dead person, as you would know, did not turn up to vote, or the person in New York did not vote. But they are continuing to identify these names and consume valuable time. 10 names ticked off, and when you check the list of electors, none of the 10 votes, none of the 10 names were called and objected to, but when you check the list of electors, none of the 10 persons were ticked off as having voted.
So you're saying...
That's the point I'm making.
It's not stated in the observation report that the claim being made about this dead person is that they did not, that their name is not ticked off on the list?
Yeah, well, those are the observations which we are making to
Okay.
point out and to establish to any reader that, look, the objection is irrelevant, without basis, and possibly nonsensical. Because why are you objecting the man or woman did not vote? So there was no ballot belonging to that man or woman.
Are you not comfortable that GCOM will take steps to ascertain the validity or the lack thereof of the objections? Because we have Commissioner Vincent Alexander saying that if there is no substantiation of one claim or allegation, then it's not going to affect the work that GCOM is doing here.
Now, that is the only scientific and sensible thing to say. My problem with that approach is, how long will that process now take? And who will manage that process? And who will observe that process? That is my difficulty. And I am saying that that entire line of objection can be avoided. Because why is GCOM allowing its own process to open up itself to this kind of attempt at destroying it? Is Mr. Alexander, Mr. Corbyn, Mr. Trotman, Madam Singh, Mr. Lowenfield, Gunraj, Shadiq, and Ben, are they all saying to the world that they ran an election so inefficiently, so incompetently, that so many hundreds, if not thousands, of dead people were allowed to vote? It cannot be. That is why I keep insisting that not only must Miss poor Yolande Ward fetch this heavy burden that the objectioners are imposing upon her shoulders, this burden must be also carried by the management of GCOM, who are facilitating this flawed, false, and unnecessary attack on their own commission and on their own work. Mind you, an election that was certified by all the observer teams, at least up to elections day, before Mingo fiasco, to be free and fair and transparent. An election that APNU, AFC themselves said were free, fair, and transparent, and that they claim that they won.
Mr. Nandlall, could you say between Wednesday of last week and now about how many of these objections you've heard of? Any average figure about dead people and immigrants?
No, I don't know the number, but I'm sure that we can amass the numbers for you. But it's obvious, Dennis, you're a smart man, and I respect you for that. It's obvious that they want to aggregate, accumulate, and add up as many of these, what they're calling irregularities, as possible, so that at the end, you will hear the argument being advanced that it is such a preponderance of allegation that it would impact the outcome of the elections. You heard Mr. Alexander spoke about the magnitude. That is what he's getting at. So they are going to ramp it up a little more. They're going to exaggerate the numbers even more. Because at the end of the day, they want to put out an argument out there that the irregularities are so huge that the election results are materially affected by it, and therefore it's not safe to accept it.
Mr. Nandlall, we were also hearing a claim yesterday by Mr. Craig that the PP has also been benefiting from this process in that it is getting votes that it did not get on voting day.
The PPP is what is happening in terms of the PPP benefiting from votes is that APNU is also benefiting too. Mistakes were obviously made, diminished mistakes, minimal mistakes, whereby when you check carefully, you find a ballot, a PPP ballot in an APNU bundle. You're finding that happening. Or, and I always knew this, that they are regarding as invalid votes, votes that are actually valid. So that the mark may not be in the box next to the cup, but in the cup itself. But on election day, in error, that vote was regarded as an invalid vote and not counted. But when it is subjected now to this scrutiny, obviously such a vote should go to the PPP because the X is closest to the PPP symbol. And that's what the law says. Once you are able to decipher the intent of the voter, then that vote should be awarded to the party that the voter intended to vote for.
And how long did GCOM say they will now extend the counting process by, and also how many counting stations are they looking at?
I would prefer, Dennis, I don't want to speak before GCOM, they are the authority on the matter. I just thought that I would allude to some of the issues that were reported to us by our commissioners, but I prefer that GCOM will give you the details on GCOM decision. I will never pretend or purport to speak for or on behalf of GCOM.
From what you're hearing, you're satisfied?
Yes, I am satisfied that GCOM has recognized the need to bring greater expediency and dispatch to the process. GCOM has seen the need to eliminate some of the irrelevance, so they are reducing the checklist. And GCOM has seen the need to reduce some of the objections that are being entertained.
And based on that, what's your forecast per day now you think the count would be?
Right now we are counting at about 50, 54. If we increase it to between 80 and 100 a day, I think that would be significant.
You think this new process will take it there?
Dennis, you have to hold me down to a number, and I don't want to pin myself down to a number. I don't want to preempt the constitutional body. Let them speak and give you the details. I'm giving you the broad issues.
Mr. Nandlall, do you have an idea of what items could be removed from the checklist?
There are a whole host of items. I can't remember them offhand. I looked at the checklist at the time when it was being prepared. But there are a number of issues there that are really irrelevant to a recount exercise. As I said to you this morning, and I wanted to correct the narrative, and perhaps I should say it again, that this is a national recount. It's not an audit. It's nothing other than a national recount of the ballot. If you take the exercise beyond the parameters of a recount, then GCOM itself would be acting ultra vires its order. The order speaks to an audit, to a recount exercise. The decision was a recount. The agreement that Mr. Granger and Mr. Jagdeo agreed to, arrived at CARICOM, was a recount. The undertaking that the chairperson gave to the court was a recount. There were some elements within GCOM arguing for an audit. The fact that that was rejected and that a recount was what the order speaks to makes my arguments even more formidable, that it's a recount that we are engaging. So anything that is beyond the scope of a recount should be eliminated.
What would they be removing from the checklist? Give me an example.
That's what I'm saying. I can't remember offhand. When Mr. Gonraj and the representatives who participated in the meeting, you will ask them all those questions.
Mr. Nandlall, I'm trying to understand why your party, and maybe you can explain it to me better, why your party would be objecting to a process that can identify the clear loopholes and irregularities in elections, since in 2015 you had claimed that the elections were rigged and went to the extent to file an elections petition. Between 2015 and 2020, there's been no structural or legislative changes to the way elections are being done. Isn't this process giving you the opportunity to find out what can be fixed in the elections and the elections body?
Nazima, let me assure you that the PPP will welcome any endeavor that is designed to scrutinize our electoral machinery, our electoral process, to identify the loopholes and to attempt to address them in a satisfactory way so that we don't have electoral problems of the nature and type that we are having. Let me give you that assurance. Unfortunately, that is not what this exercise is about. This exercise is about the recounting of the ballots. If it is that we want to examine this thing in a forensic way, then we will welcome that. We will welcome that. In fact, one of the manifesto promises of the PPP is to overhaul the electoral system of this country after consulting widely with the stakeholders and the population. This is not the exercise and the vehicle through which that undertaking can be done or executed. This is simply a recount.
Mr. Nandlall, we know the PPP's position on objections such as those related to migration and death, etc. But is the party concerned at all at this moment about acts such as missing poll books? Does this concern the party in any way?
I am happy that you raised that. Now, let us as big people. What is a poll book? A poll book is simply an occurrence book. It simply states the time that certain events took place in the polling station. What is the most important event that takes place in a polling station on polling day? Voting. The poll book is simply a record. How is that important to the recounting of the ballots? The absence of the poll book cannot alter the number of ballots on the box. Cannot. And those are the types of things that I am saying are frills that are detracting from the main event of the recounting of the ballots.
So the party is not concerned that a number...
It's not that we are not concerned. It's not that we are not concerned. We are concerned about every irregularity. But we must not elevate them to a status where they detract from the main theme of the exercise. So, a voter, Anil Nandlall, I voted at Redeemer Primary School on elections day. Of no fault of mine, somebody forget to put the poll book in some box where it's supposed to go. Are you telling me that my vote should not be counted because of some delinquent officer in that room did not poll me properly or did not put my poll book where it should be? It cannot be. And that same thing will apply to you. Would you like your vote not to be reckoned, not to be counted, because some officer did not put the poll book where it should be? It can be. It can be.
Not so much the counting of the vote, but the fact that these DCOM officials would not have sent out these documents knowing that they are the officials themselves.
Well, I would glad if you asked Justice Claudia Singh that question, because they trained them. GCOM staff were paid very, very handsome remuneration package for elections day. They went under months and months of training. Ask Mr. Lowenfield, ask Ms. Myers, what training did they do? And how come their staff would commit such an elementary error of forgetting to put the poll book where it is? But I am told that the poll book is not lost, that there are efforts to accumulate them at some point in time, to retrieve them from where they are.
When you talk about minimizing objections, when you say that GCOM is set to do that, do you mean minimizing the type of objections that's allowed to be made when examining the ballot box, or minimizing the observations that are already recorded?
Minimize as you go forward. And when I speak about minimizing observation, I want you to understand that I'm speaking about the irrelevant ones.
Okay.
Ones that should not be made. Or if they are going to be made, you must have sound evidence before you make it.
So, for example, the one where the person is not picked up as a voted, but the person is saying, "Oh, record that they're dead." That is one that you think
That's
should not
correct.
be allowed to be made.
That's correct.
Okay.
If that person did not vote, then why are we wasting time?
Okay.
And that person could not have voted anyhow, unless we have some really paranormal activities on elections day. Thank you very much.